Hi, everyone, and good morning, good afternoon, good evening, good morning. I won't go to any more languages. This is Charlene Russo. I am Vice President of GSAEC and co-chair the Campfire Committee. And we welcome you today to Who Thought Research Could Be This Much Fun? And we have our co-chairs, the Chief Fun Officers of GSAEC. And our Chief Fun Officers are Dr. Penny Potter. Penny has been an educator since 1994. She's a practicing coach. She serves as a co-chair of the Fun Committee at GSAEC. She's designed and delivered graduate programs and is very active in her research. Gordon Medlock is a faculty member at Wright Graduate University, where he is director of doctoral research and career coaching program. He is also a practicing coach. And as we said before, he's a very busy co-chair of the Fun Office at GSAEC. And so I'd like to turn this over to our Fun Officers and get us kicked off. Penny and Gordon.
Thank you, Charlene.
Okay, next. So I'm going to kick it off here. I'm Penny, obviously, and Gordon's my fun partner. And if you're on this call, we're hoping that you're as geeky as we are about theory and research. So this is just a brief overview of what we're going to talk about. We're going to, for those of you who may not be members and familiar with GSAEC, we're just going to do a broad overview of GSAEC and what we do. We're going to then kind of narrow down into the recent standard that we updated and what our findings were very briefly, a little teaser. We're then going to talk about what we have planned coming up next. And that'll be pretty much it. We will have a breakout a little bit early on in this discussion, a way for you all to talk to each other, get to know one another, and also discuss the topic at hand. Okay,
also,
next.
Just to add to that, Penny, if any of you have questions as we're going, just put those in the chat. And we will be responding to those in processes as we have time to do that. So just to let you know.
So regarding GSAEC's mission, we have a pretty big mission. Mainly, however, we're about establishing standards for coach education and making this distinctions between coach education versus coach training. Gordon, did you want to say any more?
Just to add to that, the standards that we'll be reviewing are really the foundation of this work. So we'll be getting into that in more detail in a bit. So I think that pretty much summarizes it.
Next. So these are the 20 GSAEC standards, which is a lot. And if you have ever reviewed the standards document, it's very dense. So what the standards do is primarily serve as a guide. We in the research committee are tasked with providing updates. So we have updated standard number 12. And the past year, we've spent updating Standard 7, which is what we're going to be talking about today.
So I'd like to say a little just about the whole scope of this project. I mean, part of what's exciting for Penny and I, and part of why we're here and why we're inviting you to join us, is we're really defining the evolution of the coaching profession. And when I look back at Linda Page and Terry Malpia's article back in 2014, and they talked about the founding of GSAEC back in 2005, it was like, here was a chance to really establish coaching as a profession. And it was just emerging at that point, and there wasn't really much out there in terms of really solid research. So over the last 15 years, We've seen the growth of a whole development of the profession. And we're really seeing GSAEC and the set of standards as really defining the game. It's like a chance to really have an influence on shaping this new discipline. So really want to engage you all in that process and invite you into this process. As Penny mentioned, if you notice in the different of the 20 different standards, we're in the second row here. Theory and knowledge number 7 is what we're going to be focusing on. But going down in the next months as we do further standards, we're going to be looking at the core competency issue. There's a huge controversy in coaching around valid competency models and what that involves. And we've been involved in that discussion for years and looking at the research in that area and looking at the foundation for what valid competency models look like. So as you're looking at some of these, if any of these interest you, this is a chance to really dig in and really get deep into the research of what's grounding the evolution of the profession and what questions are out there to explore. I know Penny and I have really been enriched in our own work by that experience. So the core coaching competencies is one that I'm particularly interested in. Is going to be coming up. Coaching process, understanding and defining what is essential about the process and what are the various variations based on context and understanding what the current research is and about that. It's an exciting time to be doing this work. And in a sense, I think in a very real sense, you're defining the profession for the next decade in the work that we're doing right now. So I just invite you to join us in this process if you're interested in that. And you could be a student who's just beginning, who's excited about learning, or you could be a seasoned professional who's done 25 years of research and wants to make an imprint on the profession. So really, there's no barrier to membership. All it's needed is a curiosity, a certain geekiness, as Penny said. I think a sense of humor is essential for this work, by the way. Without it, you'll die on the vine. So
if you don't have it, you will by the time you join.
That's right. So it's really, I think, a very exciting, and for me personally, it's just a very exciting opportunity to contribute and make a difference.
And I just want to say that GSAEC has kind of been on a bleeding edge for most of its existence. You know, I feel like this time is right for all the groundwork that GSAEC has done. And in particular, just a shout out to Kent Bloomberg, who's on this call, and Terry Malpia, who both of them have done some phenomenal work in the core competency area. So stay tuned for more on that.
Yeah, and I'll add Linda Page to that as well in her work in the foundational work for developing these
right.
Things.
Yeah.
Great. Okay. Well,
next
time.
So funneling down into what we do on the research committee, our primary function is to monitor and update the standards. And that's a bigger process than one might imagine on the surface. At least it was bigger at the time that I volunteered for the committee a couple years ago. So what we do is we pick a standard, and we'll go over that a little bit later. We pick a standard to focus in on, and then we start reviewing the literature and seeing what's new since the last time this standard has been updated. And then we just get on these calls and beat up some ideas, which Gordon and I are pretty good at. And we don't beat up each other, just ideas, and generally come to some sort of consensus. And then our other committee member who's on this call, Adam Smith, he jumped in right into the deep end right when we were in the thick of it. He has been so good at, just as a good coach is, just asking the right question at the right time that kind of pulls us, either redirects us or pulls us down to the ground. Gordon?
Yes, and we have another new member who's going to be joining shortly after as well. And so it's great to see people getting excited about this, and we really want to invite you into that as well. One thing I want to add is on the review of new literature, there's something that we talk about of what's in it for me, the WIFM of any particular proposition. I think for both Penny and myself, diving in and really getting deep into the literature has helped our own work. You know, Penny has written on done research on becoming a coach and the research related to that. I've been doing some work on an adult learning theory that we have at Wright that informs coaching in our practice and more broadly, I believe, as well. And that work would not have been as frankly, as good or as deep had I not been doing this work with the GSAEC project. So the synergy between the literature review we do and how it deepens our own personal academic work, our coaching work, and our research is a really rich benefit of participation in this. So I will be relentlessly inviting you to join us in these very subtle ways, which I'm sure you're getting. But the truth is, it really does. It really has been a wonderful piece of part of my life. And in terms of dissemination to the membership, we are really looking at exploring, and we're going to say a little bit more about this, developing an annotated bibliography that we will be pushing out to the membership to help you all get the benefits of what we're doing in the research committee for your own work. So those are a number of the things we're looking at right now. So next on that.
So, as we think about, GSAEC and all the coaching organizations and what they do, to me, the defining distinction between GSAEC and other professional organizations such as ICF, IAC, EMCC, is that GSAEC makes a distinction between an educated coach, so a scholar practitioner coach, versus a trained coach. And those two things are not mutually exclusive. I started out as a trained coach and then became an educated coach when I was doing my research and then subsequently being on this committee. Gordon?
Great, yeah. And I think just in terms of the section on facilitating understanding of the coaching research theory and practice, this particular standard is really foundational to a lot of the work we're doing in all the standards, because this is really what differentiates in a lot of ways the scholar practitioner from the trained coach, is that we understand the theory behind what's going on. We're not just learning a set of techniques in a kind of eclectic, picking the best of what works from different traditions, but we're really looking at what the theoretical understandings are of what we're doing. And also we put an emphasis on developing in your practice a coherent theoretical framework, which we think is extremely important. And the whole debate at times between eclecticism versus theoretical consistency and coherence is an important one. And I think this standard really identifies and works with a lot of that. So it's been a particularly foundational piece that we've been working on lately, and we're presenting to you today. Okay, next.
Yeah, so actually, Gordon kind of introed our process in this standard, which is, we started with theory, like what are in the whole wide world ocean of theories, which ones are mentioned in the coaching literature. But we basically found early on that we needed to lift, just up off the ground and look at a higher, broader level, like what helps scholars and scholar practitioners to choose which type of knowledge and theory to add to a curriculum or to use in practice. So we started out with a pretty healthy debate about, do we include epistemology? Do we include a recommendation? And that's what these standards are. They are guidelines, their recommendation. Do we include a recommendation that a coach education program should be explicit about their theory of knowledge, what constitutes knowledge from the get-go, both as they're developing and updating their curricula, but also with their students?
So on that one, Penny and I went back and forth for quite a while. And I'm the one who's got a philosophy degree. I mean, I'm a trained philosopher. Epistemology is like my sweet spot in a way. But I'm thinking, I don't know that it's that relevant. I mean, if I'm out there coaching, do I really need to know epistemology? And then Penny pushes back and says, yeah, I really think you do. And so we
actually went back and forth maybe 3 different meetings. And finally, Gordon said, well, I think you're right. And I'm like, hold on. maybe I'm not. I wish that Adam had been part of the committee at that point.
He would have definitely added to that one.
Yeah.
And one of the things that really convinced me was actually, for those of you who were at the last GSAEC conference, I think it was 2019, or I'm not even sure, 2018 now, where Tatiana Bakrova presented. And she talked about the role of epistemology, and particularly what she called the kind of integrative pragmatism, is really important for the coaching profession. That she was saying, there's really we need to have a profession, we need to have a coherent theoretical framework. And she sees an integrative pragmatism as really that foundation, because it's practice oriented. It's about action and reflective action as opposed to just reflection. And it also is very much about integrating. So you're looking at what applies. It allows for diversity of approaches, at the same time, a kind of theoretical coherence about what we're doing as in terms of a pragmatic epistemology. So that was really the one that convinced me that, it's key and it really is important. And I think actually you're going to share more a little bit about that, her work, and how informative that was for our work here today. So I guess one last thing is, you see the funnel. As I said we could spend 2 hours on this one slide, and Penny says, how about 2 days? So we actually spent about 2 months on this funnel.
Yeah.
And eventually, for those, we've written up a whole thing about this, but just to say the sequence there is looking at theoretical perspectives, what other bodies of knowledge are relevant, and that bottom piece, conceptual models, is important. How do you connect these abstractions about theory to how do I explain what I'm doing with my client in a coaching session so that they have a clear understanding of what we're doing, what the change theory is, and how it is that they can expect to benefit. So having a clear conceptual understanding of that really is critical, we think, to really well-developed coaching practice. So it comes from application to practice. It's from theoretical abstraction to the absolute. If it doesn't make a difference at the practice level, and this is the pragmatic side, it's not relevant. So This is all of that needs to be considered in the Why Theory Matters section.
Penny and Gordon, this is a good point right now to bring up a question from Benoit about speaking a bit more to the educated coach and the trained coach. And I think it fits right here perfectly.
And, I'll start the way we typically do it. I'm the starter and Gordon's the finisher. So, in my mind, it's the difference between a program that brings in a lot of content relevant to coaching versus a program that provides a foundation for students in theory and knowledge, what has already been investigated and researched in coaching, and where is the field right now in terms of scholarship. To me, that's the difference.
Yeah, and thank you, Penny. And I think what I would add is I was trained originally as a psychotherapist. I got my master's degree in clinical social work and worked for about 20 years in that field. And to work as a psychotherapist, you need an understanding of psychology. You need an understanding of psychological theory about the nature of healing and all of those different processes. So there's as a discipline to be a professional discipline, there needs to be a theoretical grounding of what you're doing. And coaching has been evolving in a way that's been an emerging process. And so coaching is offering a very different paradigm. It's not a psychotherapeutic paradigm. Many of the models have been borrowed from psychotherapy, but it's really a learning paradigm. Coaching is a learning process, and understanding that learning process and what it is you're actually facilitating when you're working as a coach and having an understanding of that. That's the difference, as opposed to trained coaches can learn a set of techniques to deliver coaching sessions and provide benefit. And I'm sure there are very many talented, gifted people, I know there are, who may not be as aware of it as a profession and may not even be interested in it as a profession. That's fine, actually. Part of what's, I think, very exciting about coaching is it is this very broadly defined profession where in a marriage, you find yourself engaged in conversations that look a lot like coaching sessions occasionally. Everybody is engaged in coaching. Their friends, their relatives, sometimes with opposition, and all the rest. But it is a broadly defined, and it actually is a significant part of the movement, is it pervades so many different areas of managerial theory and all the rest. But but to be defined as a profession, that the difference is that there is this conceptual understanding of what we're doing. And so that may be a long way to answer that question, but I hope that helps.
But I have one more piece to it, which is, I started out as a trained coach. I only knew what was presented to me, and then what I subsequently went out, in the more popular literature. And it wasn't until I started delving into the research and theory that I felt like this disparate pieces of information that were kind of like puzzle pieces started coming together into a coherent whole that helped me end up being a better coach, because I had that foundation,
right,
and coherence.
So if you could mention in the chat if that answered your question.
Yeah, does that?
No. Yeah.
Oh, Kent, that's a great metaphor. Okay, that's a great metaphor. I'm so going to use that. Mm-hmm. A trained blacksmith knows how to heat metal, pound it into a plow. An educated blacksmith understands metallurgy, thermodynamics, etc. So, great metaphor. I'm so going to use that. Okay, next.
I should add, I want to just add from the pragmatist perspective. On the other hand, if you get too involved in the metallurgy and forget how to hammer the thing, so yeah. the pragmatic dimension of theory is very important in all of this.
Right. So we are going to do a breakout, and we're going to give you all 15 minutes. Shelby is going to paste the instructions into the chat and give you instructions about how it's all going to work. What we want you to do is, number one, introduce yourself, to just a way of members getting to know one another, and then to discuss how you use coaching theory and research in your educational programs and or practice or not. Is it conscious use of it or not? So, Shelby?
Yes. So we posted in the chat the instructions that Penny just went over. And I would recommend, if you would like to keep what was just posted, copy it and then paste it again when you get into your breakout rooms, because the main chat does not transfer into the breakout room chats. And also recommended that someone be designated as maybe a note taker to record ideas, and then again bring those ideas back to the main room where they can be shared in the chat. So don't post them in your chat in your breakout room, because when you get back to the main room, you won't be able to access anymore. And that's it. We're going to do 15 minutes. I will also broadcast some reminders.
Sorry to interrupt. We do want you to come back and, post it in the chat, but also have a discussion about it with the larger group.
Yeah.
Got people coming back.
Okay.
So for whoever was the scribe, feel free to go ahead and kind of paste your notes, whatever notes that you took, points. And we'll take we'll take some volunteers from how many groups were there, Shelby?
I believe we ended up with 8 breakout rooms.
Okay. So just a brief kind of, headline, like what was the main sort of topic from your discussions? And you can raise your hand physically on the screen or in the reactions. Adam.
So we had a great group discussion. Alexandra mentioned that she had studied across sociology, psychology, and management, and recently successfully defended her dissertation. Right. She likes reaching across disciplines. She's studying systems and team dynamics, and even has built a team coaching model. So she loves spanning. And Christine, she mentioned she was in higher ed for 40 years, did her doctorate. It's about working with nonprofit organizations, openness, honesty. She really likes the work of Brene Brown, the joy of learning and reaching full potential, and theoretical area, particularly of interest to her research areas around cross-cultural.
Nice. Who's next? Who would like to go next?
I'll go next. It's Lori.
Oh, okay, shoot.
Great. Thank you. We were in a wonderful breakout group. We had Jennifer, Jen, Ingolf, and Mary. And there was a lot said about, for instance, that there's that intersection between research and practice. And the research that we're talking about today adds to the credibility and understanding. I think this, you both Penny and Gordon were speaking to that, but that was really reinforced. And that research does make the work more fun, and it helps shape coaching. There was also discussion about the boundaries, understanding boundaries between coaching and counseling and therapy. And that truly also is important. Let's see. And there was a whole dynamic of back and forth, even in our breakout team. We were working with each other and kind of riffing off of each other. And that dynamic was a lot of fun. It was also helping me understand the value I've gotten from the study of educating and coaching. So that dynamic was enjoyable too.
Oh,
Great.
terrific. Thank you.
Lori. Yeah.
So our group, Diane, Karen, Kenny Ilway, and I spent some time assuring each other that we belonged here first, and then talking a lot again about the interplay of coaching practice and coaching theory, and sort of thinking about one common theme, I think, is the idea that maybe a little bit of practice as an uneducated coach drives the need to learn more about theory, right? It's certainly, and for several of us, as we talked about how we came to the more theoretical side of coaching, it was because we realized we didn't have all of the underpinnings that we really wanted in our practice.
Good
I don't know.
point.
Team, anything else to add to that?
Yeah, it's a little daunting to get all that theory as you're also trying to build those skills. As Melissa, one of my students, is on, she can probably attest.
Yeah. So I think Diane was describing it's almost like deer in the headlights, right? There's so much theory. Did I get it right? Did I do every little thing perfectly? That it acts like almost like a speed brake, right?
Right.
Yeah,
That coaching
and I think I think what Diane also added to add on to that, Kent, was that then it impacts the relationship with the coachee or the client that you are sitting with, because then there's so much of this. As a coach, then you end up concentrating on so much of this theory that you are not able to really connect with that relationship at that particular moment.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. That's one of the biggest challenges, right? Taking in all this information and then being in the moment in an improvisational sort of way with all that stuff working in the background.
Yeah, I think that's a great point in terms of the potential dangers of getting over involved with theory at the expense of presence. And so, you go through a process where you realize you're unconsciously incompetent, and then you find you're getting consciously competent. But the goal is to get unconsciously competent, so it's no longer part of what gets in the way. But that's a rocky journey, and it can be a lot of stumbles along the way. So thank you for that. That's a great point.
And just to add on to that, that is, David Kolb said, all learning is relearning. That is a lesson I continue to relearn.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Who's next?
This is Elizabeth. If we in our group, I was with Steve and Clara and Terry, and we actually brought up Kolb's learning cycle but also things like empathy and attunement from Carl Rogers and Dan Siegel, and the idea that first there's ontology and then epistemology before there's method, and how those all integrate. That trainers focus on method. I also thought it was interesting that Steve came. He's in a doctoral program at UPenn on educational leadership and he has an interest in coaching, and that makes complete sense to me because so much of education and leadership can be conveyed through coaching, you know? Other things that we brought up were things like visioning, that for the client, it's often a discovery process. So using something like visioning is really helpful. And then at Columbia, we use this idea right at in the contracting phase where we talk about what's the work, why is it important, and it's in service of what? What's the big desire? I'm complete.
Terrific.
And group, what would we add?
Thank you.
You got it.
A++ job there, Elizabeth. Nice job.
That was beautiful.
You get an A.
Yeah. When you brought up the visioning piece, I think of the research, the value of research in distinguishing between visioning versus goal setting, and some of the research that's come out about how vision tends to be more empowering in terms of motivating, whereas goal mentality can sort of subliminally frame the possibility of failure and the need to get it right or to hit something. So that kind of research really has had a profound impact on the field of coaching, I think, in terms of looking at motivation. So our view a lot, right, is that the theory should deepen our appreciation of what we're experiencing rather than just be a new idea that you want to work with. So I think that's a good example of that.
Yeah, I'm glad you said that, because in our model at Columbia, we don't really broach goal until later in the process, mid-process, because we really want to get to that vision first, that big desire first.
Mm-hmm. Great.
Thanks.
Great.
Who's next? Or has everybody gone? Or don't have anything more to add?
I will just add from our group, we talked about the theory to practice and how we learn it. Do we learn theory first? Do we learn practice first? And which unpacks the other? So that was an interesting conversation. We also looked at leadership, the leader, manager as coach. And we talked about the different theories and the theorists that we study and how we use them. We talked about Rogers and Mesereau and Freire. We talked about appreciative inquiry, positive psychology, adult development, adult learning, experiential learning in Kolb's work, and transformational learning. And we also talked and came to agreement that good coaches are good teachers.
Mm. Mm-hmm. Good point.
I think it just makes us good all around people. That's my bias.
And as we're talking about this sense of what it is to develop as a coach is also about what does it mean to develop as a human being. And so there is that dimension of it. So I know in the field of psychotherapy, there were many people who were very trained in theory and knew how to understand and apply it, but weren't living it in a way that was experientially meaningful. And so oftentimes you had a kind of, just simply, in fact, there was evidence that many therapists are not as effective as they get more experience because they're less connected to the engagement and the kind of thing that really makes a difference. So there's really got to be, I think, an understanding, and this is probably why adult learning is such an important framework for coach education. And we'll talk more about that shortly, because it's really a process of our own unfolding and our own development that's really critical here. And that's experiential. And the theory is sort of a facilitator of that, but you've got to be careful having it not get in the way.
May I add something to that?
Absolutely.
I appreciate that, Gordon. I'm new to the group, so I'm a little bit reluctant to speak up, but thank you, Penny, for including me. This is a really interesting conversation. Rice University is a research university, and my team and I have been trying to contribute to the research in the field of coaching. One of the things, because we're a leadership institute, our coach training program is within the Leadership Institute. We are trying to measure the impact of coaching on leader development. And as Gordon said, getting trained as a coach. Coach development is adult development, which is also leader development. All of those stages, map onto one another. And we're looking at how can coaching as well as coach training programs accelerate leader identity development, build capacity for leaders at Rice and beyond. And then one of the things that, because we coach so many people through our program at Rice, we've got mountains of data that we were sitting on. And one of the papers that we're working on right now is how do you facilitate growth as a coach with professional coaching? And we've identified 4 factors that predict goal progress and the mediating role of actionable planning. So it's really exciting to have, thousands of clients that we've coached. And because we have a full-time measurement team, we're able to cut and slice the data in different ways and hopefully contribute to the research in the field of coaching in the years to come.
Wow, that's very exciting.
Ruth, can I also, and welcome, can I also put in a plug for the research that you all are doing? The primary research, I don't know if that's what he's called, has found some interesting findings when they have surveyed their students, and Rice has the desire to expand their data set. So if you are curious about whether or not your educational institution, your coaching program might be able to join that endeavor, I know that I have volunteered the George Mason future students, so don't worry, Melissa, future students, then you can contact me and I'll put you in touch with Ryan.
Great.
So Phil and Ingolf, I assume you'll do that for us. Thank you.
Yeah, great.
So I crashed Phil and John Reed's session coming in late. I crashed Penny and Gordon, and I just crashed everybody coming in late. And so got into John's background, which started with the Navy, with an ominous draft over his head, and got him into psychology much later, into industrial and organizational psychology. And so he and I kind of got off on some military conversations. And what I talked a little bit is how we start our students out coaching from their first weekend, from an existential theoretical point of view. And that we're deeply invested in the them understanding the difference between ontological anxiety and ontological guilt and existential anxiety. And we want them to optimize their existential anxiety and to dive in and understand that authenticity requires us to embrace that. And so they're working on their own authenticity from the beginning on what we call, by the way, we define leadership as the aspect of every individual that influences the thoughts, feelings, and actions of others. So one-to-one is what we call coaching. It's just leadership one-to-one, because the client is leading the coach is leading the client, and it's that mutual relationship. And so then our leadership development model is geared to have the individual take responsibility for the gap between actual results and desired results, and to see the opportunity for them to develop as they go for it, not focusing on the mirror, but focusing on them in themselves as they look at that mirror.
Thank
Nice.
you, Bob. And just also to let you know that Bob Wright is the CEO of Wright Graduate University. So I appreciate having you here, Bob. Really glad you're coming.
I'm so grateful for the work you folks are doing. It's so important. Thank you.
Thank you.
And Robert, Ruth just made an interesting comment that you might want to read.
Well, yeah, I'm just seeing your comment there. By the way, the Navy has started, you can't become an admiral without 360s and demonstrating social emotional intelligence, by the way. I didn't know if John knew that. We were talking to the first female admiral in the history of the Navy recently. So I'm eager to hear, Ruth. I'd like to hear more about that.
And our most recent cohort, our coach training program, we just had 10 instructors from Fort Leavenworth go through our coach training program too, because they're also wanting to introduce coaching into these military structures for leader development.
Yes.
Man, how
Yeah.
cool. Thank you.
Yeah.
Very exciting.
So did everyone go? I'm terrible at tracking this sort of thing.
I think we're good.
I can speak to our group, and then maybe the others can chime in. We got into a conversation about the difference between feedback and observation, and our role in that as coaches. And we didn't get a chance to wrap up the conversation because we were pulled back into the breakout room. So I'll love to hear your thoughts on that. And where the way we talked about is that idea that when we provide feedback to someone to the leader we are coaching, it sort of gets them onto the defense a little bit. And also, having worked in corporate America for about 20 years, I personally have experienced that there's a lot of connotation of negativity with feedback. The moment you say to somebody, I'm going to give you feedback, it goes to the constructive part or the negative part. And we always sort of have this sort of way of delivering is where you say something positive and then you get to really what you want to say. And it just feels, it doesn't feel very authentic and not always in the spirit of developing someone. Whereas an observation is really more about testing an assumption or testing a belief that they might have. So I'm just curious about your thoughts on that.
I'd actually like to jump in on that one, Benoit.
Okay, I'll arm wrestle you. No, go ahead.
So what we use it right as something we call a coach observation and reflection sheet. So I have our students actually recording sessions, looking at the observations of what they're actually able to observe, then the hypothesis they're making about what it is that's happening in the session, and then looking at where their own biases and their own unfinished business shows up that gets in the way. So we're actually teaching a discipline of discernment of where I get in the way of my own work with my clients. So by building that discipline, the feedback is then built into the process for the coach. So it's not like someone telling me what I need to look at. It's more like I'm exploring where my own biases show up. And then that becomes something we explore with people. So that's been a very important tool in terms of facilitating this coach capacity. And then the other piece I would just add is we often orient to vision when we teach our student leaders to orient to vision when they're giving feedback to one another. So it's in light of the vision of who I see you as possibly becoming, that what the gaps I want to point out that I'm observing are. But then I'm actually a vision holder for you in moving toward that. So the feedback is perceived as supportive rather than critical.
Mm-hmm. And I would say that becoming a coach has made me a better instructor, because the difference between, offering an observation and providing feedback, which includes inferences and assumptions, stories that I made up that may or may not be true. That is, I work really hard when I give students feedback, and Melissa will say I give a lot of feedback. I try very hard to stay data-based and then offer them some suggestions for areas that they might focus on. But it's always just an offer. So that the key part of that, in my opinion, is the development of not being attached to my idea. As soon as I offer it, it's gone. I'm not attached to whether they take it or not.
Well, there's also a syndrome in coaching, which is the use of instruments, assessments and 360s and things like that. And I always emphasize that it's the conversations that are enabled with a good coach that is what is important. Because I think it's been kind of endemic in coaching that I have to be able to use all these assessments and having a coaching engagement kind of overshadowed by or sort of disempowered or attenuated by the misuse of assessments and things like that.
Yeah.
Thank you.
The research that I brought up about feedback, I think Claire's on. I don't know, Claire, you and I may have been at the same coaching and service case, but one of the interesting things about the research that they did was it didn't matter how you gave it, how positive it was, how clear you were, how data-based. It was based on two things. One is the relationship of trust that the person has in you. But secondly, what she found, which was really interesting to me, was that people needed time to digest it before they were asked to do an action step. So giving people a chance to not to think about it, journal about it, come back to you with what they took from it, that space between the experience of getting whatever information they're getting, however you call it, and having them respond to you or take an action was the critical piece. That somehow to create a space for people to take it in, integrate, and get deactivated before they come back to you. Because there's no way, no matter how positive it is, in the research when they actually did some of the brain scans and the chemistry, that it is activating. Not a bad or a good thing. It was just fascinating to have that one piece. Just give them a chance to think about it and then come back to you with what they heard or what they plan to do or whatever it is. And that was so useful for me. It isn't anything I would have expected, but it's really shifted how quickly I moved to action and giving people, whether it's in the coaching session, give them 5 minutes just to think about it, journal it, take a walk, and then come back and let me know what they heard or how they make meaning of it or what they observed and what they want me to know, or however I want to say that. So I thought that piece of research was really, really interesting.
Well, Charlene, I think that we just identified another topic for another campfire because this is a really juicy conversation and that I would love to continue because that whole marriage of scholarship and practice is my sweet spot. We do have a little bit more content to share, though. Gordon?
One thing I just want to add that this is also bringing up for me the value of sharing this kind of research information, feeding that back into the research committee as informing what we do. This is a huge value.
Yes.
What you all are sharing here is of tremendous value. So we're probably going to want to circle back and glean everything that you've been sharing into our work. So, and for those of you who decide to join us in playing this game, we encourage you to participate in that as well. So thank you. This has been very helpful.
We're going to bring up the remaining slides just to share with you all what we found as we were updating Standard 7. Okay, so when we were looking at Standard 7, originally it was Helene and I, and then she had to kind of drop out to finish her book, and then it was Gordon, and then Gordon joined me. But we were looking at the standard. It was a decade ago or more that it was written. And so basically it said coaching is a field that just borrows from other fields. And I'm like, I really don't think that's true anymore. But I haven't actually focused in so much on coaching specific theory. So Gordon, do you want to take it from here?
Yeah. So part of what was exciting for us as we dug into this, and you're going to hear a little bit more about the Cox, Bakrova, and Clutterbuck research on the evolution of the profession, and particularly a piece that Tatiana Bakrova wrote on how coaching is becoming what she calls a reference discipline. And what that means is that it has now generated enough of its own research that we are now informing other theories, that we are becoming, coaching psychology is becoming a discipline in its own sense. And just to make that point, clear is that as we're learning about coaching and the learning process that happens in coaching, it's informing our understanding of adult learning. That there's really a reciprocal understanding of the coaching models are informing that as well as the other way around. And so, and frankly, I haven't seen a lot of work on this, but I believe the coaching, I know for myself, my experience as a coach has informed the way I look at psychotherapy practice. I think that the coaching models are going to invite therapists to look differently at how they're involved in learning, perhaps, and not always just operating out of these medical models. So that's all, I think, really the richness of where we are right now. This is what makes this such an exciting time to be doing this work, is we're really shaping a discipline in the process of becoming a reference discipline. So very exciting work. excuse me just a moment.
Yeah, the field is shaping itself, and we're just sharing what the shape is as best as we can see it right now. So
well, let me say though, Penny, that's true, but also we get a chance by actually documenting and forming it to influence that process. So
exactly,
for those
I
of you
agree.
who are looking for a way to contribute, this is an opportunity in that respect.
Okay, next slide. So this is from an article by Cox, Bakrova, and Clutterbuck that was kind of the pivotal point in our process, because we were actually looking at the oceans of theory inside and outside of coaching and going, oh my gosh, where do we start? And this article kind of where they mapped the territory, all the theoretical influences in coaching, this was a pivotal time. It helped us kind of coalesce our thinking. Gordon?
Yeah, and just some of the points in this diagram that were really helpful. If you notice the outside circle, adult learning and development is the framework within which coaching is being viewed. And this is the claim that they're making, that this is the best integrative framework for looking at coaching. That's a very exciting development in our view, and it really is providing some coherence to the field. The other thing that's exciting, particularly about Elaine Cox's work, is looking at the process of coaching. And you'll notice that there's the circles within this. There's one on coach and client as individuals. In other words, the psychology of being a coach or being a client. You see psychology of individuals being one of the key disciplines there. Then to the left, you'll see coaching relationship and process. We're looking at what's the research that relates to communication theory, relationship theory, philosophy, education. Those kinds of models are relevant to that particular domain. And then you have the relationship of context. In what context are you doing your work? It makes a difference if you're an organizational coach, an executive coach, or a life coach, and in what areas you're working and what fields are going to be relevant. So this becomes a map, the beginnings of a map as we found it, for really starting to map the territory of what theoretical orientations are about and knowledge is about in the field.
Okay, next slide. So when we set out to kind of go, okay, what's out there, what we said, our criteria was we were not going to update this standard unless we found evidence in the coaching literature for theory applied to coaching. And gosh darn it, we found it. So we were able to kind of map, these are the meta categories that we found evidence for coaching related theory. So adult learning, psychology, narrative coaching, solution problem, goal focused approaches, neuroscience, and then organizational and systems. And this is how it breaks down. So next slide. Oh,
let me just add to that also that we are also in the process of reviewing our models. So we are still open to, is there a box missing? Is there someone else who has access to research that maybe we should be looking at? Or is there anything else out there that you would say, what about? So just to let you know, we are finalizing this model at this point. So.
Yeah, I mean, this is what we have found to date. So, it's like what I was saying to Adam and Gordon the other day. It's like painting the Golden Gate Bridge. You're never done. You get to one end and you start moving toward the other end. Okay, go ahead. Next slide. So under adult learning, andragogy, experiential, transformative seem to be the main buckets for adult learning. This is kind of, an area that I spend a lot of my time. I actually created a model for dialectical learning in coach training. And it's based on transformative, experiential, and andragogy, as well as an offshoot of experiential learning, which is conversational learning. Mm-hmm. Once I started diving in, I remember the time that I went, oh my gosh, as I was trying to define coaching, what is coaching? I realized it is about adult learning. So once I learned about the theories.
Thank you.
I know you have a lot to add to that, Gordon, because this is your sweet spot too.
Yeah, short pace. We've been doing some research on adult learning as well. And part of what we're working with is the integration of experiential and transformative learning. Those disciplines tend to be viewed and analyzed and researched separately. And now there's a beginning to look at what are the synergies between. This is a sort of integrative perspective we've been talking about. So we've been looking at the experiential process of learning, and then at what point does it become transformative, and what are some of the differentiators of that? So there's a lot of exciting new stuff, I think, happening in this area.
Penny and Gordon, there's a question from Suzanne who asks, aren't the rapid developments in neuroscience more a body of knowledge that supports the theories rather than a theory by itself?
Great question.
That is a great question.
Let me just speak to what this particular standard is. It's actually bodies of knowledge, theory and bodies of knowledge. I mean,
right.
So what neuroscience provides is a huge body of research on the mapping of behavior to neural processes, right? And being able to establish those correlations. So in and of itself, she's correct. It's not a theoretical orientation per se. It is an attempt to map and understand the brain functions and how it relates to other pieces. At the same time, it really enhances and deepens theoretical understandings in certain areas. For example, the study on emotion has taken on a huge impetus through the brain research in the past 25 years. There's been a big, strong orientation toward cognitive behavioral in the fields of psychology and those models and the coaching models related to that. And the trend and the research in neuroscience has really shown the importance of the integration of the emotional in that. And so what it's done is actually starting to inform and enriching theory by virtue of the kinds of knowledge that's being shared there. So it's a subtle relationship. It's well put. And but you're correct. It's essentially, it's not a specific theoretical orientation in itself. At least that's my understanding of it.
And I think the follow-on question from Alexandra, building on what Penny said, brings us to the heart and core of what we're doing today. What is coaching? And isn't that the question?
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Yeah. I spent 2 years figuring out what my definition that works for me. And, it was surprising because I had been coaching for about 7 years at the point that I started looking at that and realized I don't actually know what it is from a definitional standpoint.
Penny, this is a good issue. We haven't actually formalized that piece, the idea of coming to a consensual understanding of the definition of coaching as part of the theory and body of knowledge framework. And that might
Gordon, that might be the next update. All right, let's move on to the next slide because we have a few more tidbits that we want to share.
So I just want to briefly speak to this one in terms of the fields of psychology. These are the major fields. What we've done is we look at the handbook of coaching currently and drawing what are the highest level theoretical orientations that are implied in about the 40 some different, what they would call genres of coaching. These are the broad categories that we saw: cognitive, behavioral, developmental, existential, humanistic, positive, and psychodynamic. And those can be grouped. And in the way we've developed the framework, we've actually grouped what falls in underneath these. The one point I want to say is something about Adlerian psychology. You notice it's not there listed as a specific discipline. We've put it in under cognitive behavioral. And an interesting gap in the coaching research is there's very little on owning or identifying the relationship of Adler to the coaching profession, which is, I know there are a few of us like Linda, perhaps from the Adler Institute, and certainly we at Wright, we put a strong emphasis on Adlerian theory is very important in informing the coaching profession. So right now it's folded in under cognitive behavioral, but I think we're also identifying areas where some of these areas of research, we would want to encourage more development in those areas as well. So this is an evolving process, but it gives you a framework. Again, thinking of these models of when you're educating your students as a program leader in a coach education program, exposing them to a range of these theoretical orientations to just broaden their understanding of what the game is part of what we're talking about.
All right, next slide. So you'll notice that there are three kind of categories off by themselves. We found in the coaching literature evidence of theory and knowledge in these three: narrative, solution, problem, goal focused, and neuroscience. But there isn't a ton of information, and we didn't find any kind of buckets underneath those. And then we also, in terms of context, focusing on organizational systems, and how we broke that out was leadership theory, team and group dynamics, systems and complexity, and cultural competency. So kind of societal, global level thinking. That's just how we could see ways of chunking it out. I'm sure it's not perfect, but it worked for what we found.
Yeah. And I'm thinking of that neuroscience question that came up earlier, Penny, that what I'm seeing is there's a lot of really valuable neuroscience research connected to the psychotherapy world, but not as much explicitly into the coaching world. So it'll be interesting to see how that evolves. I suspect it will substantially as we're looking more at some of the implications of that research for our field as well.
You know, in Melvin's book, they bring in, you know, in addition to resonant leadership, they bring in neuroscience, and, you know, it's just a lovely book. And when I say Melvin Smith is one of the co-authors of a book that came out last year that I'm thinking of using with my students next year. It's just a great combination of scholarship in service of practice that and actually is readable. So Melvin is our GSAEC chairman right now. Okay, next slide.
Good move. Thank you.
So how we ended up, you know, this week we have pages and pages and pages of references that could be useful to members. And so how we mapped it out is we created a really long table. I don't know how many pages it is, like 10, 15 pages. And we started with the theory category. Then we provided some brief definition. Then we listed what theories contributed to this kind of meta theory. And then we listed the references that pertain to coaching specifically. So there's tons of knowledge out there, but if it didn't exist in the coaching literature, we said, okay, we can't take on the whole ocean. So,
and just to let you know, at a certain point, once this is finally completed, we will be making this available to the institutional members. And the idea is that you then will have the resources, references to research to help you think about your curriculum. What elements might you want to include that you haven't? What might you be interested in reading for yourself in terms of your own research? What you might want to use for informing the practice. Just as Penny was mentioning, bringing in Melvin Smith's book to inform her coaching practice, that sort of thing. This can be used to really upgrade your own educational process using these standards in this literature.
And that next slide, that kind of brings us to what's next. So Standard 7 is in review and revision. Terry and Linda are reviewing it right now, and it landed at a terrible time at the end of the semester. So it's a lot to wade through. So Standard 7, review, revision, and acceptance. Our next standard that we're going to be working on is Standard 17, faculty qualifications and supervision. I have not found a lot of literature on that, but I haven't been looking. So that'll be interesting to dive into. And if anybody on here has resources that you want to, point us to, that would be great. And then we decided, since we have this treasure trove of resources, it might be helpful for members if we started crowdsourcing an annotated bibliography. So an annotated bibliography is more than just a reference. It's a short evaluative paragraph. We're just in the beginnings of thinking about that. Right now, we do have a discussion forum in the members section of the website, where if you have an evaluation of a key piece of literature that would be of benefit to you and other members, you can post that there. Hopefully we'll be getting a more refined process going forward. That's what we're doing right now. So next slide.
So
this is just a description of what an annotated bibliography is. And then my good friend, Gordon Medlock, has written an example for you all based on the article, the Cox, Bakarova, and Clutterbuck article. So next slide. So this is Gordon's very good annotated bibliography summary. So it's a summary of what the article is about, and it's also evaluative. So this is helpful to students. It's helpful, in your research if you're doing a literature review. So we're hoping we can get enough juice going that people just start deluging us with tons of samples to review.
Right. And I think this is in process. This is an initial draft, but I think we're really looking at formalizing it. You'll notice at the bottom, there's a reference to which standards does this particularly relate to. So one of the things worth imagining as we look at this process is that this material would come to the research committee. We would look at what standards are most relevant and add a piece like that. There might be a section where we add is how would this be most useful to a practitioner or to a researcher? So we may have some other sort of ways of calling out for searching the database for particular kinds of things that might be helpful here. So this is, as I say, a work in progress, but we're really looking at the communication of all this work back to the membership so that you experience the value of what we're doing for your own practice on a regular basis, and that's available as one of the benefits of being a member. So
yeah. Next slide. We just wanted to acknowledge our members and our newest institutional member, George Washington University. So these are the institutional members of GSAEC, and this is a very fine community to be part of.
I was just looking at this list to see if Rice University was on this list. I think it needs to be on there. How do we get them on this list?
Ruth may have jumped off too soon. Okay, so hopefully she'll look at the recording. Okay, next slide, because we only have a few more minutes, and I apologize for that. So, Charlene.
So thank you. And I'd like to thank our chief fun officers for providing a stimulating and fun conversation around research. And as you said, Penny, we've just scratched the surface. So many good ideas came up today to continue these campfires. We wanted to alert you to a bonfire that we're having this summer, July 22nd and 23rd. And we will be approaching scholars and practitioners for presentations and participation in that bonfire. We would love to have your ideas. And if you would like to be involved in planning and presenting it, if you'd like to be a presenter, please get in touch with us. We would love to hear from you. And if anything, the experience with Penny and Gordon this morning probably has your mailboxes filled up already with people who want to affiliate on your research committee and to contribute to the work that you're doing. And we want to thank you and thank all of the participants who generously shared ideas. The chat box was going very actively throughout the breakout sessions. Many times in conferences, meetings like this, after the breakout session, the registration drops by 50%. We got new members in our session this morning after the breakout. So good for you. And we want to thank everyone, and we will be in touch with you and let you know, but please be in touch with us and let us know that you are excited about getting involved with the bonfire and working with Penny and Gordon on their groundbreaking work. So thank you, everyone. And we'd like to thank Shelby and Tricia for managing us and keeping us on target. And we'll see you again soon.
And we will be sharing out these slides and posting the recording.